The most recent news about Gene Simmons is making waves, but fans didn't expect it. His fiery face was the face of Kiss for decades, a rock star who turned shock into fame and fame into money. Fans have been having fun with rock star Gene Simmons for years, fans who have been with Kiss for many years. The Kiss Army is what they're called, but behind the makeup and bravado, new information is making people wonder about his family, his business, and the choices he made that are now coming back to haunt him. Is it bad news, forgiveness, or something that's not quite clear-cut? One thing is for sure, there is more news than music, and the truth is still coming out. From Haifa to the Evil One, Gene Simmons used to be just Kim Witz before he turned into the demon who breathed fire on stage and spat blood into roaring arenas. A boy from Haifa, Israel, who was raised by a single mother who had lived through one of the worst times in human history. Before I was born, I didn't know anything about life, history, or anything else. It's just that I knew my mother and our father were there. Yes, even our father. I didn't want to make him my own. His start wasn't very exciting. They were marked by lack, pain, and a strong desire to never feel helpless again. That drive would help him make the character he later made, which was both protection and fun. Simmons was born into a family that was still affected by the Holocaust. Flora Klein, his mother, had lived through the concentration camps in Hungary and lost family members to the Nazis before she was able to leave and start over in Israel. That bad experience stuck with her. She didn't talk much about what she had been through, but her quiet and overprotection said a lot. Chaim grew up in a place where learning how to survive wasn't just an idea, it was something they did every day. His parents had it up by the middle of the 1950s. In order to raise Chaim, Flora worked long hours in workshops while his father stayed behind in Israel. Sometimes all they had for dinner was bread and milk. In those years, the boy who would one day be in charge of arenas was just another hungry kid trying to make ends meet. He even made his own winter coat out of an army blanket, which doesn't look much like the leather-clad rock god he would become. But bad times can make you more ambitious. Chaim got away by reading comic books, especially American ones like Superman and Spider-Man. He looked at the panels even before he could read English. He learned the language word by word because he wanted to understand the people he looked up to. He could speak Hebrew, Hungarian, and Turkish by age 7, and he was starting to put together English. It wasn't just words. It was all about change. His heroes were able to hide their pain behind outfits and superpowers, so maybe he could too. In 1958, Flora made a choice that changed her life. After leaving his family behind, Shehan Hayim moved to Queens, New York. He had no money and no clear plan for the future. It was a big change. He was amazed by toilets that flushed and TV dinners, but school was mean, and his accent made him stand out again as an outsider. He would think about how he was going to leave his mark instead. He kept going, though. He went door to door selling cactus plants, picked fruit, and watched TV and read books to learn English. He got stronger every time he was turned down. Chaim had a new pair of shoes when he was in his early teens. To legally change his name to Gene Klein, he took the name Gene from country stars like Gene Autry and made it sound more like a rock star's name, Gene Simmons. He played guitar for hours on end, hung out with small bands, and studied pop culture without getting nearly as much done as he did in school. When the Beatles played on The Ed Sullivan Show in 1964, it set his soul on fire. He didn't just want to admire fame, he also wanted to take it for himself. He did these weird jobs, like working in butcher shops and delis and then as a teacher in Spanish Harlem, to save money while planning his real career behind the scenes. He didn't drink or do anything illegal, he just kept his eyes open and watched as other people fell off. His very clear view became part of who he was, always calm and ready to act. The early lessons Simmons learned came to life when he worked with Paul Stanley to finish the basics of Kiss. He didn't want to be just another artist. He wanted to be famous, invincible, and much bigger than life. In order to do this, he made the Demon, a character based on horror movies, comic book villains, and parts of his own youth. The painted face, the blood, and the fire-breathing were all more than just tricks. They were a cover and a message, that he would never be that weak little boy from Haifa again. It did more than just keep him safe. It led to the growth of a business empire base. D on shock, show, and strategy, the Kingdom of Kiss. In the early 1970s, Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley didn't just want to make music when they started Kiss. They planned to make a show that would get people's attention before the first note was played. Simmons, who was always good at planning, quickly saw that music could only be half the business. The other half? Branding, image, and making a Kiss product that fans could buy and keep. It was the base of the look. with Ace Frehley dressing up as the spaceman, Peter Criss as the Catman, Paul Stanley as the Starchild, and Simmons as the Demon. The band's image became clear right away. During a time when rock bands were often hard to tell apart, Kiss stood out like a superhero. Simmons saw that the business could do well in more than just sound. Kiss could be more than just a band if kids could dress up like the band members. It might be a name. The plan worked. Kiss started selling merchandise in 1975, even before they had their first big radio hit. Boxes of lunch, trading cards, toys, posters, and belt buckles came out. The rock world had never seen anything like it, even though the parents did. Like the music, their kids insisted that they buy toys with the Kiss name on them. Within a few years, the band's merchandise was making millions of dollars, sometimes more than their records. When the live record Alive came out in 1975, it was the turning point. It caught the chaos and spectacle of their concerts and helped them break into the mainstream, selling millions of copies. Kiss was no longer just a cult act. They played in stadiums that were packed to the brim, and their fans formed a group called the Kiss Army. Simmons knew exactly what it meant, not only through ticket sales but also through everything else that happens during the event. Loyalty could be turned into money. Kiss had licensed more than 100 items by the end of the 1970s. These included pinball machines, Halloween costumes, and even board games. Simmons came up with ideas that most bands would find funny. Think of Kiss-branded graves from many years ago. You had no shame in being so simple. It was bought by 10 people. Kiss would sign it. Some people said it was shameless. Simmons, though, said it was just good business. It would be silly for the band to only be known for records and shows when they could be known for everything in pop culture. Always looking for ways to make money had to have results. By the late 1970s, the band was known all over the world, but some fans and reviewers said the music didn't seem to get enough attention for its own sake. In 1978, the TV show Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park made things even worse. Many people thought it was just another gimmick because the acting was so flat and the story was so silly. For Simmons, though, it was just proof of idea. Kiss was no longer just a rock band. It was a company that could grow into movies, TV shows, and other areas. Simmons has worked on this idea over the years since then. By the early 2000s, Kiss had put its image on more than 5,000 different types of goods, things like credit cards and condoms. The money Kiss made from products had already topped $1 billion by this point. So when conservatives called him a sellout, Simmons didn't care and often said, "Being called a sellout means someone's buying." The line that summed up his firm stance. Because they are so focused on their brand, Kiss was one of the first bands to turn music into a company. Simmons has seen how characters and products in comic books, superhero movies, and TV shows have made people loyal to a brand. He did the same thing, but in a rock and roll way. Not only does each tour turn into a show, but it also has a new merchandise drop and a new way to make money. It was a cruel recipe, but it worked. In the 2020s, not many bands from the 1970s can still work as pack groups. Kiss can. This brand has been around for a long time, not only because of its music, but also because Simmons is determined to keep it alive. He not only made a band, but also a business. But behind the bloodthirsty businessman was a man who had to balance his private life with his public one, front of the cameras, which erased a part of his past that had been bothering them and made their relationship difficult. Then Gene suggested a turn in fate that no one had thought of before. Gene asked Shannon to marry him in July 2011, after being together for almost 28 years. Nick and Sophie, his kids, were there with him at the wedding in October. Nick was the best man and Sophie was the maid of honor. The wedding was supposed to be a private pardon, but it turned out to be a public show. Some people called it a publicity stunt, but for many fans, it was a rare glimpse of an emotionally open guy who had avoided commitment for years. After denying it for a long time, the man was finally able to say that a lot of his fear came from scars he got as a child. What about reality TV? Changed the official story about Gene Simmons. People who watched him on TV saw him change from the monster of Kiss to the flawed partner, the sometimes awkward father, and the man who is trying, rather late in life, to balance ego with love. Sharon, Nick, and Sophie used the show as both a test and a stage. For Gene, it was a change in how people saw him, one that he couldn't fully control. The cams were turned off in 2012, but the sounds of family jewels are still heard. It showed that Gene Simmons wasn't a monster, but rather a man who was stuck between myth and truth. As soon as his kinder side came out, though, he was in trouble again, showing the world that the demon's shadow could still cause chaos. When fame returns the favor. Gene Simmons liked being in trouble for most of his career. He played the bad guy like a devil, an egotistical businessman, or a womanizer who doesn't feel bad about it. It worked back in the 1970s. News stories about Kiss's excess only added to his reputation, but by the 2000s, tastes had changed. This was once seen as rock and roll. El bravado, but is now being looked at more closely. Simmons was never one to hold back, but cases, scandals, and bad press made it hard for him to keep up all the things he had built. In 2010, Victoria Jackson, a makeup artist for ESPN, said Simmons was acting inappropriately during an interview on SportsCenter. This was one of the first major incidents. She said he touched her and hugged her while he was dressed up. Simmons said the charge was ridiculous and even filed a countersuit saying that the touch was impossible because of his metal codpiece. It was a quiet end to the case, but it set the tone. Off stage, his style of shock didn't work as well. In the years that followed, more claims came to light. A worker at one of his Rock and Brews restaurants told police in 2016 that he had touched her inappropriately. In 2017, the same claim was made. Both cases were settled out of court, but they pointed to a trend Simmons had long thought was just a matter of misunderstandings. He said that people were getting the wrong idea about his jokes or mistaking his bluntness for bad behavior. Even though there was no fire, the cases still made a mess. Public.